On a freezing winter night, Marcus Kane, a dedicated officer with an unshakable sense of justice, finds himself humiliated by two rogue officers during a routine stop. Little do they know, the man they've tried to belittle will soon become their new chief. Tasked with leading a department riddled with corruption, Marcus faces fierce resistance from officers Radley and Reed and their ally, Captain Price, who will stop at nothing to undermine his reforms. Will Marcus manage to bring integrity to a broken system, or will the weight of sabotage and betrayal push him to his limits? Follow Marcus's journey as he fights to restore justice to his community and earn the trust of those he serves. If you're ready for a story of courage, reform, and resilience, hit subscribe, leave a comment about where you're watching from, and join us as we uncover how one man's resolve transforms a town. The story starts now. The winter wind howled across the deserted road, scattering snow in waves against Marcus Kane's car. The old sedan creaked as it idled on the shoulder of the highway, huddled in darkness under a moonless sky. The stars provided a dim glow, their light fractured by snowflakes that sparkled like dust in the piercing headlights. But the light was fading, and with each passing second, Marcus felt the bitter cold seep further into his bones. Inside, Marcus rubbed his gloved hands together, blowing into them to keep warm as he peered at the dashboard, studying the erratic flicker of the check engine light. The meeting in the city had run hours later than planned, and now, after midnight, he was alone on a desolate road far from any signs of civilization. The heater had already started to lose its battle against the cold, and Marcus's breath misted in the air, tiny clouds swirling before disappearing into the darkness. He looked at his phone, but the signal bar was stubbornly empty. He would have to get out and check the engine, though he wasn't optimistic about his rusty car maintenance skills. With a resigned sigh, Marcus turned off the engine, pulled on his thick wool coat, and slipped out of the car. The wind bit into his face immediately, and he tightened his scarf, pulling his coat collar higher as he hunched against the elements. The snow beneath his boots crunched with each step, echoing in the stillness as he moved to the front of the car. The night air smelled crisp, almost metallic, mixed with the faint scent of gasoline from the nearby highway, now deserted under the midnight sky. He flipped up the hood, squinting into the engine compartment, his breath fogging as he studied the mess of wires and tubes. He had a basic understanding of cars, but the knowledge lay buried in a part of his mind that he hadn't visited in years. "Come on, old girl," he muttered under his breath. "Don't quit on me now." As he fumbled around, his fingers numb despite the gloves, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was alone in a vast emptiness, dwarfed by the endless night. The wind whipped across the open fields, making the highway stretch feel endless. It should have been peaceful, but a growing tension crept over him, sharpening his senses and prickling at the back of his neck. He was about to give up and retreat to the car's limited warmth when he noticed the distant glow of headlights approaching over the hill, growing brighter with each passing second. Relief washed over him, tempered by caution. It was late, and he was a black man alone on a deserted road. He knew all too well the risks of such situations. Yet a part of him was grateful that someone might offer help or at least get him to a town where he could call for a tow. As the lights drew closer, he realized it was a police cruiser. The car slowed as it approached, the glow of its headlights casting harsh shadows over Marcus's car and sending flickers of light across the snowy ground. The cruiser stopped a few feet behind him, its blue and red lights flashing in sharp, rhythmic pulses. Two officers climbed out, and Marcus felt a small pang of apprehension despite his own badge tucked into his wallet. He knew the dynamics of these encounters too well. Moments where appearance and timing could outweigh experience, leaving respect and professionalism to the mercy of assumptions. The older officer, a thick-set man with a bristling gray mustache and cold, appraising eyes, approached first. His hand hovered over his flashlight, which he now raised slightly, casting a beam of harsh white light over Marcus's face. Behind him, his younger partner, a wiry man with a sharp, observant gaze, stayed back, his posture tense. Marcus raised his hand slightly, a practiced gesture of transparency. "Evening, officers," he said in a calm voice, nodding as he offered a polite smile. Car trouble. Engine, just quit on me out here. The older officer, whose name tag read Officer Radley, nodded slowly, his expression remaining impassive. Car trouble, huh? His tone was detached, almost bored, but there was an edge to it, a note of suspicion Marcus had learned to recognize. Yes, sir. Just on my way home after a meeting in the city. Looks like I'm going to need a tow. He hoped his words might soften the tension, but Radley's face remained stony. Radley's partner, Officer Reed, stepped forward, his flashlight sweeping the interior of Marcus's car. Funny place to break down, Reed muttered, his tone carrying a hint of mockery as he glanced at his partner. Marcus held his ground, choosing his words carefully. It's not ideal, that's for sure. He managed a slight chuckle, but his muscles were taut, and a familiar unease crept over him. Radley continued to study Marcus, his eyes narrowing as if dissecting him. Mind telling us what you're doing out here at this hour? Marcus fought the urge to sigh, recognizing the line of questioning. As I mentioned, I was coming back from a meeting in the city. The car stopped, and I was trying to get it going again. Reed exchanged a glance with Radley, the corners of his mouth twisting into a smirk. Late night for a guy like you, isn't it? Marcus held back a retort, reminding himself to stay calm. He'd been through this before, each encounter a reminder of his father's words. Stay polite. Keep your hands visible. Don't argue. Don't react. It was a mantra drilled into him through years of quietly tense experiences like this one. The officers exchanged a silent signal, and Marcus could sense their shift in demeanor. They weren't here to help. They had already made their assessment, and it wasn't one in his favor. Radley shifted his stance, angling his flashlight so it shone directly into Marcus's face, forcing him to squint. Let's see what we've got here, he said, gesturing toward Marcus's car. Without waiting for permission, he moved toward the driver's side door, shining his light across the seats and dashboard. Is there a reason you're searching my car, officer? Marcus asked, his tone calm but laced with a firm politeness. He knew better than to challenge them outright, but he couldn't stop himself from asking. Radley's response was dripping with condescension. Routine, sir. Just routine. Not every night we find someone like you out here all alone. The implication was as clear as the freezing night. The words stung, but Marcus swallowed his anger, hands still held visible at his sides, moving only to brush a stray snowflake from his coat sleeve. He could feel their eyes on him, scrutinizing him, waiting for a reaction they could twist to suit their assumptions. Reed stepped closer, folding his arms over his chest as he surveyed Marcus, his gaze cold and calculating. Out here alone, huh? He sneered. Mind stepping over there? He gestured to a spot a few feet away, his tone carrying an unspoken command that Marcus knew he couldn't ignore. Marcus hesitated, glancing between the two men. He could sense their anticipation, the slight glint of enjoyment in Reed's eyes. But there was no real choice here. He could comply or risk something far worse. Moving slowly, he stepped away from the car, his breath visible in the icy air as he stood under their scrutiny. They moved in tandem, Radley searching his car with casual disregard while Reed watched Marcus with a half-smirk, his arms crossed over his chest. Marcus's patience wore thin as they rifled through his things, muttering to each other with thinly veiled disdain. His mind raced with memories of past encounters, moments of quiet humiliation endured in the name of survival. Then came the suggestion he'd been dreading. Reed smirked, glancing at Radley. How about a little exercise to keep you warm? The words dripped with mockery, a challenge and an insult wrapped in one. What do you say? A few push-ups to shake off the chill? Marcus's stomach twisted, but he knew the look in their eyes, knew they wouldn't stop until they'd gotten what they wanted. His pride urged him to refuse, but survival won out. With a controlled nod, he lowered himself onto the frozen asphalt, feeling the cold seep through his gloves as he pressed his palms against the ground. Each push-up felt like a lifetime. The laughter of the officers above him, the sneering comments about his strength and endurance, cut deeper than the cold. He focused on his breathing, pushing through the pain and humiliation, clinging to the thin thread of dignity he could salvage. As he pushed himself up and down, his thoughts drifted to memories of his father's quiet strength, his words about pride and resilience in a world that so often challenged them. With each movement, he promised himself that this humiliation would not define him, that one day he would be the one with the power to ensure no one else endured moments like this. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Radley called him to stop. Marcus rose to his feet, brushing snow from his clothes, his hands raw from the cold and his body aching. The officers gave him a few last looks of contempt before turning away, satisfied with their display of power. They left him there alone in the darkness, the red and blue lights fading into the night. Marcus took a deep breath, letting the cold air fill his lungs as he watched them go, a quiet determination growing in the hollow left by his humiliation. He would remember their faces, their words, every detail of this night. One day, he would ensure that men like Radley and Reed no longer wielded their power unchecked. Marcus stood alone on the empty road as the patrol car's lights disappeared into the distance, leaving him in a darkness as cold and profound as the chill he felt in his bones. For a long moment, he didn't move. He simply stood there, forcing himself to breathe through the anger, to steady the knot of humiliation that twisted in his stomach. As he climbed back into his car, he tried the engine again, hoping against hope that it would start. But the car remained stubbornly silent, its engine refusing to turn over. With no other options, Marcus bundled himself against the cold, huddling in the driver's seat to wait for help to arrive. The hours dragged on, and finally, the faint glow of headlights appeared in the distance. A tow truck slowed as it pulled up beside him. Its driver, a burly man with a kind face and an expression of sympathy that reminded Marcus there were still good people out here. "Rough night, huh?" the driver said, helping Marcus secure his car to the truck. "Don't worry, we'll get you sorted. This weather's a killer for old cars like this." Marcus offered him a tired smile, grateful for the man's straightforward kindness. He climbed into the warm cab of the tow truck, letting the heat thaw his stiff hands and shoulders. He didn't mention the encounter with the officers, though the sting of their taunts lingered in his mind like a bruise that refused to fade. Instead, he thanked the driver quietly as they began the long drive back toward town. In the days after the incident, Marcus returned to his duties at the city precinct, throwing himself into his work with a renewed sense of purpose. For years, he had worked to build a reputation as a fair and capable officer. He'd handled cases with tact and empathy, earned the respect of his colleagues, and garnered the trust of the community he served. But now, each call he responded to, each routine patrol, was colored by the memory of that night. The cold, dismissive looks of officers Radley and Reed replayed in his mind at odd moments. He thought about his late father, a man who had taught him the value of restraint and dignity even in the face of indignity. His father had always believed that justice would prevail, that decency and integrity would eventually earn respect. But now, Marcus wondered if he'd ever truly seen justice for men like Radley and Reed, men who wielded their authority without a shred of accountability. He confided in his friend and fellow officer, Marissa Hayes, a quiet but tenacious detective who had been a close colleague for years. Marissa listened without interruption, her expression growing thoughtful as he recounted the events on the deserted road. "Have you thought about reporting it?" she asked carefully, her voice low. Marcus shook his head. "It's my word against theirs. And besides, I don't want to be the guy known for causing friction. I'm just trying to do my job." Marissa nodded, but a flicker of concern lingered in her eyes. "You shouldn't have to put up with that kind of treatment, Marcus. No one should. And if we're not holding each other accountable, then what are we even doing?" Her words echoed in his mind long after she left his office that evening. They gave voice to something he hadn't been able to admit to himself, that he wanted more than just a career where he could do his job well. He wanted a department, a community, a system that truly stood for justice. And for the first time, he felt the stirrings of a desire to do more than just follow orders. He wanted to lead. A month passed, and the encounter on that cold night gradually faded into the background. Marcus settled back into his routine, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something inside him had changed. His work took on a new edge, a drive to be better, to stand up for something more than the daily grind. Then came the unexpected call from the commissioner's office. The announcement was brief and to the point. Due to his commendable record, Marcus was being offered a promotion to chief of police in a neighboring county, the very precinct where Radley and Reed worked. He was floored. The position was both a surprise and a challenge, a chance to lead at a higher level than he'd ever imagined. The decision weighed on him. He knew that taking this role would mean more than just a new job. It would mean a shift from enforcing the rules to shaping them, from managing cases to managing people. And he knew all too well the types of officers he'd be managing. Men like Radley and Reed, who had entrenched themselves in the system and wielded authority like a personal weapon. Yet he couldn't deny the sense of responsibility that came with the offer. This was an opportunity to do more than just uphold the law. It was a chance to build a legacy, to create a standard of integrity that could change lives. After careful thought, he accepted the position, fully aware of the challenges that awaited him. The precinct buzzed with curiosity and anticipation as word spread of the new chief's arrival. Marcus entered the building early, dressed in a crisp, tailored uniform that felt like armor as he stepped through the halls. He could feel the eyes of his new colleagues on him, assessing him, wondering who this new chief would be and what he stood for. Captain Alan Price, a seasoned officer with a powerful presence and a reputation for keeping the status quo, was the first to greet him. Price was a tall man, his hair graying at the temples, his handshake firm but lacking warmth. "Welcome to the department, Chief Kane," he said with a polite smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I'm sure you'll find we run a pretty tight ship here." Marcus nodded, meeting Price's gaze without flinching. "Thank you, Captain Price. I'm looking forward to working with you and the team." The exchange was cordial, but there was a subtle edge in Price's words, a challenge that Marcus sensed immediately. As he moved through the building, meeting officers and staff, Marcus felt a pang of recognition when he saw Radley and Reed in the hallway. They spotted him at the same moment, and their eyes widened in shock before narrowing in suspicion. Radley's jaw tightened, and Reed cast a glance at his partner, as if silently daring Marcus to acknowledge the encounter on the road. Marcus remained composed, giving them a neutral nod as he continued past. He wouldn't let them see that they had affected him, but the memory of that night lingered, fueling his determination to change the culture that allowed officers like them to thrive without accountability. That afternoon, Marcus called his first department-wide meeting. The precinct's officers and staff filled the briefing room, some eager, others wary, a few openly skeptical. Radley and Reed stood toward the back, their expressions unreadable, while Price watched with arms crossed, observing Marcus with calculating eyes. Marcus cleared his throat, his voice steady as he addressed the room. "Good afternoon, everyone. As you know, I'm Chief Marcus Kane, and I'm honored to be here. I want to make it clear from the start that my priority as chief is to uphold integrity, professionalism, and fairness within this department." He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. "We're here to serve the community, to earn their trust and respect. That means we hold ourselves to the highest standards in every action, every case, and every interaction. I expect each of you to live up to those standards, just as I expected of myself." A murmur rippled through the room, and Marcus noted the varied reactions, some nodding in agreement, others shifting uncomfortably. Radley smirked, glancing at Reed with a look that said he didn't take Marcus's words seriously. Price's expression remained impassive, but Marcus could sense a subtle resistance simmering beneath his calm exterior. Marcus finished his address with a firm statement. "Let me be clear. This is a new chapter. We're not here to protect power. We're here to protect people. And as long as I'm chief, that will be our mission." The silence that followed was heavy with tension. Marcus knew he had laid down a challenge, and he could feel the defiance in the room. But he also saw a glimmer of respect in the eyes of a few officers, an acknowledgement that he was here not just to lead, but to change things. In the days that followed, Marcus dove into his work with focus and dedication. He reviewed case files, studied the department's practices, and began implementing changes with a steady hand. He knew he'd face resistance, but he was prepared for the pushback. Radley and Reed were the first to show open defiance, questioning his decisions in meetings, making snide comments about his policies, and subtly encouraging other officers to resist. Marcus kept a close eye on them, documenting their behavior but refusing to engage in their provocations. He wouldn't be baited. He was here to set an example, and he intended to do just that. Meanwhile, Captain Price maintained a careful distance, his polite cooperation masking an underlying resistance to Marcus's reforms. He offered occasional advice, though it was laced with veiled warnings. "Chief Kane, we've had a certain way of doing things around here," he said one afternoon, a hint of condescension in his tone. "Sometimes change can be disruptive." Marcus met his gaze evenly. "Change is necessary, Captain. I'm here to ensure this department serves the community with integrity, not just tradition." Price's smile was thin, his expression revealing nothing. But Marcus could feel the resistance building, a quiet but powerful undercurrent of discontent that he would have to overcome if he wanted to make a lasting impact. Over the following weeks, Marcus pushed forward with a plan to reshape the department, holding firm to his vision for accountability and transparency. He implemented training programs focused on ethics, de-escalation, and community engagement, all designed to restore the public's faith in the department. But he encountered resistance almost immediately. Officers like Radley and Reed, who thrived under the old ways, scoffed at the new protocols, seeing them as an intrusion into their routines. They began spreading complaints among other officers, claiming Marcus's changes were unnecessary, painting him as an outsider trying to fix something that wasn't broken. Captain Price, while not directly opposing Marcus's policies, kept his distance, choosing to remain passively resistant. His influence was subtle but powerful. A longtime officer with an unspoken network of loyalty, he knew how to sway those around him without making his discontent explicit. The tensions reached a boiling point during one of Marcus's newly mandated de-escalation workshops. Officers were instructed on how to handle tense situations with calm communication and a focus on conflict resolution. Marcus felt this training was essential, especially in a community where relationships with the police had been strained by years of unaddressed misconduct. Radley and Reed sat at the back of the room, their expressions bored and dismissive. Halfway through the session, Radley leaned over to his partner, speaking loud enough for others to hear. "So, we're just supposed to talk our way out of everything now? Maybe we should carry peace signs instead of badges." The remark drew a few chuckles, but Marcus, who was leading the training himself, stopped mid-sentence and turned to face Radley. He kept his tone even, his expression unreadable. "Officer Radley, would you care to share your thoughts with the rest of us?" Radley smirked, shrugging as he leaned back in his chair. "I just think this feels a little soft. We're supposed to enforce the law, not hold hands and sing Kumbaya." Marcus held his gaze, sensing the quiet challenge in Radley's words. "Respecting the people we serve doesn't make us weak, officer. It makes us effective. And if you have a problem with that, I encourage you to take it up with me after the session." The room was silent, the tension thick as Radley shifted uncomfortably under Marcus's gaze. He forced a casual shrug, muttering a half-hearted, "Yes, sir," before falling silent. Marcus continued with the training, undeterred, but he knew he had planted a seed of defiance that would take root in the coming days. Outside the department, Marcus was gaining support. Community leaders had taken note of his efforts and began inviting him to neighborhood meetings, school events, and local gatherings. His presence was met with initial skepticism. Many residents had endured years of distrust toward law enforcement, but Marcus knew that trust wouldn't be built overnight. One evening, he attended a town hall meeting hosted by the city's community association. He listened as residents voiced their concerns about safety, their distrust of the police, and their desire for change. Marcus could see the frustration in their eyes, hear the skepticism in their questions, but he stood firm, answering openly, admitting where the department had fallen short, and pledging to make things right. A young mother, holding her son by the hand, raised her voice from the back of the room. "Chief Kane, my son is 8 years old, and he's already scared of the police. He shouldn't feel that way. How are you going to change that?" Marcus approached her, kneeling to meet the boy's gaze. "I'm sorry you feel scared, buddy. My job is to make sure you're safe and that you can trust me and the people I work with. We're working to change things so that you and everyone in this community feel safe again." The sincerity in his voice softened the room, and the boy looked up at him, nodding hesitantly. Marcus turned back to the mother, his tone gentle but determined. "It's a slow process, but I promise we're committed to building that trust. And it starts with being here listening to you." The interaction left an impression on the community. News of his outreach spread, and slowly, people began to view Marcus not just as a police chief, but as an advocate for real, positive change. This support emboldened him, giving him the resilience he would need in the face of the escalating resistance within the department. The next day, Marcus returned to the precinct, aware that his growing reputation in the community hadn't gone unnoticed among his officers. He found Captain Price waiting for him in his office, an unreadable expression on his face. "Chief Kane," Price began, his tone polite but clipped, "I heard about your appearance at the town hall last night. Interesting approach." Marcus nodded, maintaining a neutral tone. "It's important for people to know that we're listening, that we're serious about making a change." Price tilted his head, a faint smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Change is good in theory, Chief, but be careful. People around here are set in their ways. Not everyone's interested in these reforms." Marcus met his gaze evenly. "If we're here to serve the people, then our duty is to adapt. This department should reflect the needs and values of the community, not the other way around." Price chuckled, the sound humorless. "Idealism is nice, but in the real world, it's a different story. Don't let these people fill your head with their complaints. We're here to enforce the law, not to make friends." "Respect and trust are necessary for enforcement, Captain," Marcus replied, his voice firm. "I believe this community deserves a department they can trust, and I intend to deliver that." Price's eyes narrowed, a subtle hint of irritation flashing across his face. He paused, as if weighing his next words carefully. "Just watch your back, Chief. Pushing too hard on the wrong people can have consequences." Marcus felt the veiled warning, but he refused to let it intimidate him. "Thank you for the advice, Captain. I'll keep that in mind." As Price left his office, Marcus was left with a sense of foreboding. Price's warning was not just a suggestion. It was a sign that his resistance ran deep and that he would not hesitate to protect the status quo. But instead of discouraging Marcus, the encounter only strengthened his resolve. A few days later, Marcus received a call from one of his officers regarding a missing case file. It was a routine investigation, a minor disturbance call that should have been straightforward. But when Marcus reviewed the paperwork, he noticed discrepancies. Statements were missing, details were omitted, and the report had been filed in the wrong cabinet. At first, he thought it might be an honest mistake, but then it happened again with another case. The evidence was subtle, but it was clear to Marcus. Someone was tampering with cases under his watch, intentionally undermining his authority. He immediately suspected Radley and Reed, knowing they had both the access and the motive. He documented each incident meticulously, preparing evidence in case the sabotage continued. He didn't confront them directly, choosing instead to observe their behavior, gathering information he could use if the situation escalated. But the sabotage only continued, with files misplaced, reports delayed, and paperwork missing key information. Each instance seemed designed to disrupt the progress Marcus was making, to frustrate his reforms and erode the community's confidence in his leadership. As Marcus struggled against the resistance within the department, he found unexpected support from a small group of officers who appreciated his vision. Among them was Officer Ben Harris, a quiet, observant veteran who had seen the flaws in the old ways but had never felt empowered to challenge them. Harris approached Marcus one evening, his expression earnest. "Chief, I just want you to know that not all of us are against you. Some of us want this change too. It's been a long time coming." Marcus nodded, grateful for the solidarity. "Thank you, Harris. Your support means a lot. We're in this together, and I'm going to need people like you to help make this department something we can all be proud of." Encouraged by Harris's words, Marcus began to build a network of allies within the department. He quietly rallied officers who believed in his mission, who wanted to see the department regain the community's trust. Together, they strategized ways to counter the resistance, to build a team that would stand strong against the efforts of those trying to undermine him. Late one evening, after most of the precinct had emptied out, Marcus found an envelope slipped under his office door. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a typed message: "Stop pushing, or you'll regret it." Marcus's grip tightened on the note, his jaw clenching as he processed the words. It was a threat, plain and simple. A reminder that his efforts to reform the department were not welcomed by everyone, and that someone was willing to take drastic measures to protect the old ways. But instead of fear, Marcus felt a surge of determination. He was here to bring change, to challenge the status quo, and he would not back down. He carefully folded the note and placed it in his drawer, knowing it was only the beginning of the challenges he would face. As he sat in his office, the weight of his responsibility pressing on him, Marcus knew one thing with certainty. He was ready for the battle that lay ahead. And no matter the obstacles, he would fight for a department that honored justice, integrity, and the trust of the community it served. Marcus spent the next several weeks reinforcing his reforms, standing firm even as subtle acts of sabotage continued to crop up across the department. Despite these attempts to undermine him, he remained unyielding. Files went missing, equipment accidentally malfunctioned, and important case notes occasionally vanished from his desk. He knew he was being targeted, that those who resisted him were determined to push him out or force him to compromise. But Marcus was resolute. He kept documenting each incident, silently building a record of the misconduct he encountered. Meanwhile, Radley and Reed's behavior grew increasingly audacious. They whispered in hallways, rolling their eyes during his meetings and even smirking during policy reviews. Every glance they shared, every thinly veiled insult, tested Marcus's patience. Still, he kept his emotions in check, refusing to let their provocations derail his mission. The tension in the precinct was palpable. Those officers who had aligned with Marcus felt the strain as they watched Radley and Reed's petty defiance. Officer Harris, Marcus's trusted ally, quietly expressed his frustration one afternoon, voicing what many felt. "It's like they think they're untouchable, Chief. Radley's been getting away with this for years. They're used to getting what they want." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "That's exactly why we're here, to show them that this kind of behavior won't be tolerated anymore. But we can't give them any reason to claim we're acting unfairly. We stay vigilant, professional, and patient. Their actions will catch up to them." Outside the department, Marcus's efforts were being noticed, and support from the community continued to grow. Residents began speaking out, sharing stories of positive experiences with officers, and even the local newspaper ran an article praising the new era of integrity in the department. Marcus's community outreach programs were met with enthusiasm, and citizens regularly attended open forums to voice their thoughts. At one such forum, a local pastor spoke directly to Marcus. "Chief Kane, you've brought hope to this community," he said, his voice resonant. "For years, we felt unheard. We thought things would never change. But your dedication has shown us that maybe, just maybe, we have someone who truly cares." The crowd erupted in applause, and Marcus felt a sense of pride. He thanked the pastor, assuring the attendees that he was committed to long-lasting change. This support fortified him, strengthening his resolve to stand against the resistance within his department. But Marcus knew that his growing popularity only fueled resentment within the precinct. Radley and Reed saw his success as a direct threat, and Captain Price's patience seemed to be wearing thin. Frustrated by Marcus's unwavering stance, Radley and Reed began escalating their actions. They started misplacing critical evidence in key investigations, subtly disrupting cases, and occasionally delaying calls or misreporting incidents. Their defiance became more than an inconvenience. It was beginning to affect the department's ability to serve the community effectively. Marcus confronted Captain Price, hoping to secure his support in reining in the disruptive behavior. He laid out his concerns, careful to frame the discussion professionally. "Captain Price, these disruptions can't continue," Marcus said, his tone measured. "If we're going to maintain the community's trust, we need every officer on board." Price's expression remained impassive, but there was a hint of irritation in his voice. "Chief Kane, you're coming down hard on these men. They've been here longer than you have. Maybe they just need a little patience. Marcus met Price's gaze, unflinching. It's not about patience. It's about accountability. If certain officers aren't willing to work within these standards, then they don't belong here. Price sighed, folding his arms as he leaned back in his chair. Careful, Chief. There's such a thing as pushing too hard. I've seen it before. Officers get fed up and find ways to make things difficult. And trust me, these aren't the types to just back down. Marcus's jaw tightened, but he kept his tone level. With respect, Captain, I won't back down either. If they're determined to resist, then I'll handle it. But I expect everyone, including you, to support these changes. This isn't optional. The two men held each other's gaze for a long, tense moment, and Marcus saw the challenge in Price's eyes. But he didn't waver. Finally, Price shrugged, a faint, mocking smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. Very well, Chief. But remember, every action has consequences. Marcus left the office feeling a renewed sense of determination, but also a weight of foreboding. Price's words echoed in his mind, reminding him that the battle for accountability wouldn't be won without a cost. The next morning, Marcus arrived at the precinct to find another note waiting on his desk. This time it was typed in bold letters. You're making things harder than they need to be. Back off before you regret it. Marcus sat back in his chair, studying the note with a sense of grim resignation. He had expected resistance, but this was more direct, more personal. Whoever was behind these notes was clearly willing to cross lines, determined to intimidate him into backing down. But instead of fear, the threat only fueled his resolve. He carefully filed the note, adding it to the growing collection of incidents he was documenting. If he had to, he would present this evidence to the commissioner or even higher authorities. But for now, he would let his actions speak louder than words. He was here to make a difference, and no threat would deter him. The escalation reached a critical point when a high-stakes case, a missing persons report involving a local teenager, was sabotaged. Crucial evidence disappeared. Witnesses' statements were mysteriously delayed, and leads went unpursued. Marcus was livid, realizing that this was more than just careless disregard. It was intentional interference in a case where time was of the essence. He gathered his team, addressing the situation with a controlled intensity. We're here to protect this community, and that means handling cases with respect and professionalism. Anyone who thinks it's acceptable to play games with people's lives doesn't belong here. The words hung heavy in the air, and though he didn't call out Radley and Reed directly, the implication was clear. Radley smirked, barely concealing his disdain, while Reed crossed his arms, glancing defiantly at his colleagues. Unable to ignore the blatant insubordination any longer, Marcus pulled Radley and Reed aside after the meeting, bringing them into his office for a private discussion. Gentlemen, it's become apparent that there's been a pattern of negligence, and it's affecting our ability to serve this community. If you think this behavior is acceptable, you're mistaken. Radley leaned back, his expression smug. We're doing our jobs, Chief. If you have a problem, maybe you should look at how you're running things. Ever think that maybe you're the problem? Marcus's eyes narrowed, his voice low and steady. Understand this. I will not tolerate this kind of conduct. If it continues, you will face disciplinary action. This isn't a threat, it's a promise. Reed muttered under his breath, but Marcus heard him clearly. Guess we'll see about that. He dismissed them, watching as they left his office with cocky grins and whispering among themselves. But Marcus was undeterred. He documented the interaction, adding it to his growing file on their behavior, determined to build a case that would leave no room for excuses. Despite the internal turmoil, Marcus's reputation in the community continued to flourish. Local leaders took notice, and community activists rallied behind him, organizing events to support his mission of integrity and reform. At a neighborhood gathering, the town's youth center director approached him, extending her gratitude. Chief Kane, you've done more for this community in the past few months than we've seen in years. People are starting to believe in the police again, to see that there's someone fighting for us, she said, her voice filled with emotion. Keep going. We're behind you. The outpouring of support filled Marcus with renewed purpose. He knew that he wasn't just fighting for his department. He was fighting for the people who had been neglected and mistreated, for the families who deserved a police force they could rely on. Price, noticing the community support for Marcus, decided to take a subtler approach to undermine his authority. He began circulating rumors among the officers, suggesting that Marcus's focus on idealistic reforms was putting their jobs at risk. Officers began hearing stories about departments in other cities that had suffered after similar changes, that morale had fallen, that officers had lost their positions. "People are talking, Chief," Price said one morning, his tone almost gleeful. "They're worried that your policies are, let's say, distracting us from the real work of policing." Marcus met Price's gaze with an unyielding expression. "The real work of policing, Captain, is to protect and serve with integrity. If anyone disagrees with that, they're free to take their concerns to me directly." But the seeds of doubt Price planted began to spread. Officers who had been indifferent to Marcus's reforms started expressing discontent, grumbling about paperwork, longer hours, and the burden of community engagement. Marcus felt the undercurrent of dissatisfaction and knew that Price's influence was a powerful obstacle to his progress. In the weeks that followed, the tension in the precinct reached a fever pitch. Marcus's reforms had triggered open resistance among some of the officers, while others quietly backed his mission, creating a palpable divide within the department. Those who supported him were growing weary of the hostile environment, often facing pushback and thinly veiled threats from Radley, Reed, and their small but vocal group of allies. Marcus, meanwhile, felt the weight of his responsibilities press heavier with each passing day. The missing files, misplaced evidence, and altered reports had become more frequent, and it was clear to him that this was not just passive resistance. Someone, or several people, were actively working to undermine him, taking advantage of every opportunity to make him appear ineffective. One morning, Officer Ben Harris, Marcus's most trusted ally, approached him with a serious expression. "Chief, I've been hearing some talk. Radley's been telling people that your policies are a waste of time, that you're just here for the spotlight." Marcus nodded, his jaw tightening. "I'm aware. Radley's been vocal, and he's got some influence, but we can't let him derail this." Harris hesitated, then added, "There's more. Captain Price. Well, he's not directly opposing you, but he's fueling the discontent. People respect him, and he's making them think twice about your leadership." Marcus felt a pang of frustration, but he managed a calm nod. "Thank you, Harris. I'll take it from here." Harris left, leaving Marcus alone with his thoughts. He knew Price was a formidable opponent, and his subtle manipulations were dividing the department. But Marcus also knew that giving in was not an option. He had to continue, for the community's sake and for the officers who wanted a department they could be proud of. The growing friction between Marcus and the dissenting officers came to a head during a routine briefing. Marcus had called the department together to discuss a recent string of burglaries, which had left the community on edge. He emphasized the importance of empathy, urging officers to focus on supporting affected families and restoring a sense of safety to the neighborhood. "Let's remember that our job is to serve the community," Marcus said, his tone calm but firm. "People are looking to us not just for protection, but for understanding and reassurance." Radley, who had been leaning against the wall with a look of open disdain, decided this was the moment to air his grievances. "With all due respect, Chief, I think you're missing the point. We're here to enforce the law, not to babysit people. This isn't a community outreach group, it's a police department." The room fell silent, and all eyes turned to Marcus. He could see Radley's smirk, the barely disguised challenge in his eyes. Marcus took a deep breath, keeping his voice steady. "Officer Radley, enforcing the law and supporting our community are not mutually exclusive. If you don't understand that, perhaps you need to reconsider why you're here." Radley's smirk faltered, and he glanced around, as if expecting backup from his colleagues. But while a few officers nodded in agreement, the room remained mostly silent. Marcus had asserted his authority, and it was clear that most officers respected his commitment, even if some didn't like it. As the meeting ended, Radley muttered something under his breath, loud enough for Marcus to hear. "Keep playing the hero. We'll see how long that lasts." Marcus didn't respond, but he felt the words sink in. The battle lines had been drawn, and he knew that Radley's defiance was more than just bravado. It was a warning. Shortly after the confrontation, Marcus received a report regarding a high-profile assault case. The community was anxious for a resolution, and Marcus knew the investigation would be under close scrutiny. But when he reviewed the case file, he noticed discrepancies. Key evidence was missing, witness statements were incomplete, and details of the suspect's background had been altered. Marcus called a team meeting, choosing his words carefully as he addressed the issue. "We have a duty to handle every case with care and integrity. Any tampering or neglect is a serious breach of that duty, and it won't be tolerated." He saw Radley and Reed exchange smirks, but he knew better than to react. He was documenting everything, building his case meticulously. But the frustration gnawed at him. He was forced to devote more time to dealing with internal sabotage than to focusing on his mission of reform. After the meeting, he pulled Officer Harris aside. "I need you to keep an eye out, Harris. I have reason to believe that someone's interfering with our cases." Harris nodded, his face serious. "You've got it, Chief. I'll keep my ears open." With Harris's support, Marcus felt a surge of resolve. He would get through this, no matter the obstacles, because he knew the community deserved a department they could trust. Amidst the turmoil within the department, Marcus continued to build strong ties with the community. He organized neighborhood meetings, inviting residents to share their concerns and ideas for improving safety. His willingness to listen and engage earned him the trust of local leaders, who saw him as a true advocate for positive change. At one gathering, a local school principal approached Marcus, her face filled with gratitude. "Chief Kane, thank you for everything you're doing. My students have been scared to walk home alone, but since you came, they feel safer. It's made a real difference." Marcus smiled, humbled by her words. "That's exactly why I'm here. I want every family in this town to feel protected and respected." Word of Marcus's efforts spread, and community members began speaking out in support of his reforms. The local newspaper ran an editorial praising his commitment to accountability, and social media buzzed with stories of his involvement in local events. People were starting to believe in the department again, and that trust fortified Marcus's resolve. But he knew the growing public support would only intensify the resentment among certain officers. They saw his popularity as a threat, proof that he was gaining influence both inside and outside the precinct. Captain Price, feeling the weight of Marcus's growing influence, decided to employ a more covert approach to undermine him. He began subtly encouraging officers to lodge complaints about excessive workloads and unnecessary policies, casting Marcus's reforms as an unnecessary burden on the department. In private conversations with officers, Price would say things like, "I know Kane means well, but these changes are stretching us thin. He's making it harder to do our jobs the way we've always done them." The whispers of dissatisfaction spread, and soon, a few officers approached Marcus, voicing concerns about burnout and increased pressure. Marcus listened carefully, acknowledging their frustrations and adjusting where necessary. But he remained firm on one point: accountability was non-negotiable. As he dealt with these complaints, he couldn't ignore the fact that Price's influence was a powerful obstacle. The captain had built years of loyalty, and his subtle undermining was creating a rift that Marcus couldn't afford to ignore. The tension finally reached a breaking point one evening when Marcus discovered a crucial piece of evidence. A surveillance tape in an ongoing case had been tampered with. He reviewed the tape, noting that critical moments had been edited out, rendering it almost useless. This wasn't just negligence, it was sabotage. Marcus called an emergency meeting, his tone steely as he addressed the room. "This department is facing a serious issue," he began, holding up the tampered tape. "When evidence is mishandled, when cases are interfered with, it's not just a violation of protocol. It's a violation of the trust the community has placed in us." Radley shifted in his seat, his expression defiant. Maybe people wouldn't mess up if they weren't overworked with all these extra initiatives. Marcus fixed him with a steady gaze. "This isn't about workload, Officer Radley. This is about accountability. And let me make myself clear. Any officer caught tampering with evidence will face immediate consequences." The silence that followed was tense, and Marcus saw Radley's face flush with anger. But he held his ground, knowing that he had to send a strong message. The time for warnings was over. He was prepared to act against anyone who undermined the department's mission. After the meeting, Captain Price confronted Marcus in his office, his face red with frustration. "Kane, you're pushing people too far. You keep this up, and you'll lose the entire department." Marcus met his gaze without flinching. "If holding people accountable means losing them, then they don't belong here. I'm not compromising on integrity, Captain." Price shook his head, a bitter smile on his face. "You're not going to last. You think these people will just change because you walked in here? You don't understand how things work." Marcus's voice was calm but firm. "No, Captain. I understand exactly how things work, and that's why I'm here to change them." Price left, his expression a mix of resentment and disbelief. Marcus knew he had made an enemy of the captain, but he refused to let it deter him. He would see his mission through, no matter the cost. As if to underscore the seriousness of the opposition he faced, Marcus found another note slipped under his office door that night. This time, it was more direct, a thinly veiled promise of retaliation. "You're in over your head. Leave now, or you'll be sorry." Marcus read the note, his face expressionless, then carefully placed it in his growing file of evidence. He knew that whoever was behind the threats was feeling threatened themselves, that his commitment to reform was shaking the old guard's sense of security. But instead of retreating, Marcus felt a renewed surge of determination. He had come this far, and he wasn't about to let intimidation derail him. His job was to serve the community with integrity, to build a department that embodied the values he held dear. As he sat alone in his office, the precinct quiet around him, he thought of the people he was fighting for, the families who had lost faith in the system, the officers who wanted to do good but had been silenced by a culture of complacency, the community that deserved police force it could trust. Marcus took a deep breath, his resolve unwavering. He knew the road ahead would be difficult, that the resistance would grow stronger. But he was ready. He would face whatever challenges came his way, because he believed that justice, accountability, and integrity were worth fighting for. In the days following the latest anonymous threat, Marcus intensified his vigilance, his focus sharpened by the clear signs that someone, or several people, within the department was actively working to undermine him. He continued documenting each incident meticulously, each piece of missing evidence, every edited report, building a case that would eventually expose the truth. But despite his careful planning, Marcus knew he couldn't afford to wait forever. The constant tension was taking its toll on his team, and he sensed the growing frustration among officers who wanted to support him but feared the repercussions. Even his trusted ally, Officer Ben Harris, had begun to look weary. One evening, after a particularly grueling day, Harris pulled Marcus aside. "Chief, I'm with you, and I always will be, but the morale in the precinct is hanging by a thread. Radley and Reed have been stirring up trouble nonstop, and people are starting to wonder if anything's going to change." Marcus nodded, appreciating Harris's honesty. "I understand, Ben, and trust me, I'm not sitting on my hands. When the time is right, I'll act. I just need you to hold the line a little longer." Harris nodded, but his expression remained serious. "We're behind you, Chief. Just don't wait too long. Radley and Reed, they think they're invincible. I don't know how far they're willing to go, but they're definitely not slowing down." As Harris left, Marcus sat alone in his office, his mind racing. He knew the time for waiting was coming to an end. Radley and Reed's defiance was growing more brazen, and he needed to make a stand to prevent further damage to the department and the community it served. The breaking point came sooner than Marcus expected. It was a routine call, a minor traffic stop involving a young couple who had rolled through a stop sign. But when Marcus reviewed the report later that day, he noticed glaring inconsistencies. The couple had reported feeling harassed, claiming that Radley and Reed had conducted an unnecessary and overly aggressive search, detaining them without probable cause. Marcus was furious. He had made it clear from the beginning that professionalism and respect were non-negotiable. He called a meeting with Radley, Reed, and Captain Price, determined to address the issue head-on. As the three officers entered his office, Marcus stood behind his desk, his gaze hard. "Gentlemen, I just reviewed the report from today's traffic stop. Can someone explain to me why standard procedures weren't followed? Why the subjects of this stop felt they were treated unfairly? Radley shrugged, feigning indifference. They were acting suspiciously, Chief. We had a right to search them. Marcus's voice remained calm, but his words carried an unmistakable edge. Suspicion doesn't give you license to ignore protocol. This is exactly the kind of behavior I've been warning you about, and it's going to stop. Reed crossed his arms, his face twisted into a smirk. With all due respect, Chief, you're turning this place upside down with these new rules. Not everyone thinks the way you do, and frankly, we're just trying to do our jobs. Marcus took a deep breath, holding their gazes with steely resolve. If doing your job means disregarding protocol and disrespecting the community, then you're not doing your job. You're abusing it. And as of today, that ends. Both of you are on notice. Any further incidents, and I'll make sure you face disciplinary action. Radley's smirk faded, replaced by a look of cold anger. You really think you're going to change things around here, don't you? Well, some of us have been here a lot longer than you, Chief. This department isn't going to bend to your ideals. Marcus met his gaze, unflinching. I don't care how long you've been here, Radley. This isn't about you or your opinions. This is about upholding the law and serving the community. If you're not willing to do that, I suggest you consider other options. The room was thick with tension as Radley and Reed exchanged glances, both visibly seething. Captain Price, who had been watching with a neutral expression, finally spoke up. Chief, perhaps we can handle this matter a bit more discreetly, Price said, his tone carefully controlled. After all, these are officers with years of experience. A little flexibility might go a long way. Marcus's patience snapped. Flexibility doesn't mean compromising integrity, Captain. This department is here to serve the people, not to cater to egos or traditions. And as long as I'm chief, that won't change. The silence that followed was heavy. Price's face hardened, and Marcus could see the shift in his demeanor. The silent acknowledgement that Marcus wasn't going to back down. News of the confrontation spread quickly through the precinct, and soon, officers were divided into clear factions. Those loyal to Marcus rallied around him, quietly affirming their commitment to his mission of accountability and integrity. But Radley and Reed's influence was undeniable, and they rallied their own group, spreading rumors and resentment like wildfire. The divide within the department was palpable. Tension simmered in the break room, and officers loyal to Marcus found themselves ostracized or belittled by Radley and Reed's followers. Even routine interactions became charged with hostility, the air thick with unspoken challenges. Marcus called a meeting with his supporters, aware of the strain they were facing. I know this isn't easy, he said, his voice steady, but we're making a difference. The community sees it, and so do the people we serve. I need each of you to stand firm. We're in this together, and we're going to see it through. Officer Harris nodded, his voice filled with determination. We're with you, Chief. This department needs change, and we're not backing down. Marcus felt a surge of gratitude. He knew that without allies like Harris and the other loyal officers, his mission would be far more difficult. Their commitment reminded him why he had taken on this role and why he couldn't afford to let Radley, Reed, or Price derail his vision. Meanwhile, support from the community continued to strengthen. Residents, local leaders, and even neighboring towns began to recognize the changes Marcus was implementing. News outlets covered his reforms, highlighting his commitment to accountability, and social media was flooded with messages of support. However, Price viewed Marcus's growing popularity as a threat to his own influence. Sensing that the tide was turning, he decided to take a final, desperate measure to challenge Marcus's authority. In a private meeting with the commissioner, Price painted a picture of a divisive leader whose reforms were causing turmoil within the ranks. He argued that Marcus's changes were unrealistic, that they were eroding officer morale and straining department resources. The commissioner, however, was cautious. He'd seen the positive public response to Marcus's work, and he knew that the community valued the chief's transparency. He listened to Price but refrained from taking any immediate action, leaving Price with a bitter sense of defeat. Realizing that his attempts to undermine Marcus had failed, Price decided to confront him directly. Late one evening, he found Marcus in his office, poring over case files. "Chief Kane," Price began, his tone cold. "We need to talk. Your methods are causing a lot of disruption, and it's affecting our ability to operate smoothly. Perhaps it's time you considered scaling back." Marcus didn't look up. "If by disruption you mean accountability, Captain, then I'm afraid we're at an impasse. I didn't come here to keep things comfortable. I came here to change things." Price's face darkened. "This isn't just about change, Kane. You're alienating officers who have dedicated their lives to this department. They're questioning your leadership, and frankly, I don't blame them." Marcus met his gaze, his voice calm but firm. "This department isn't a private club, Captain. It's a public institution. And if certain officers can't handle the responsibility that comes with the badge, then they're free to leave." Price's expression shifted, his mouth tightening. "You're making a mistake, Chief. People like Radley and Reed, they're not going to just roll over. They've got support, and if you keep pushing, you're going to lose control of this department." Marcus stood, facing Price directly. "Then let them try. I'm not here to make friends. I'm here to serve this community with honor. If that threatens your position, then maybe it's time for you to reconsider yours." For a moment, Price looked as though he might say something more, but he remained silent, his face a mask of barely concealed anger. He turned and left without another word, leaving Marcus alone in the silence of his office. As the days passed, Marcus sensed that he was nearing a breaking point. The department was at a crossroads, and he knew that the choice he made now would define his leadership and determine the future of his reforms. He reached out to the commissioner, requesting a formal review of the department's conduct, including the incidents involving Radley, Reed, and Price's influence. He presented the documented evidence of tampering, the anonymous threats, and the growing list of complaints from the community about unfair treatment. The commissioner agreed to an investigation, recognizing the gravity of the situation. He assured Marcus that he had his support and that accountability would be enforced, no matter where the investigation led. The commissioner's investigation officially commenced, and Marcus's documentation of every incident became crucial evidence. His records were extensive: notes on missing files, altered reports, tampered evidence, and importantly, the anonymous threats left on his desk. As the investigators began their work, whispers and glances filled the precinct, and officers fell into hushed conversations, speculating on what would come next. Radley and Reed wore defiant expressions, their postures tense, but outwardly unperturbed. They exchanged glances across the briefing room, as if daring anyone to implicate them. Captain Price, however, was less confident. His eyes narrowed with a calculating expression, and his usually calm demeanor showed signs of strain. Marcus maintained his composure, his resolve unshaken. He continued his daily duties, refusing to engage in any conversations about the investigation, remaining focused on his mission. He had worked too hard and sacrificed too much to let intimidation deter him now. Word of the investigation spread beyond the department, reaching community leaders who had come to trust and respect Marcus. Several reached out to express their support, emphasizing the positive changes they had already seen under his leadership. The local pastor, who had attended Marcus's community meetings, organized a small gathering in front of the police station, rallying residents to show their appreciation for the chief's work. "I believe in what Chief Kane is doing," the pastor told the gathering crowd. "For the first time, we have a leader who's willing to stand up for what's right, even when it costs him. We're here to let him know we stand with him, just as he stood with us." Community members shared stories, offering words of encouragement, some even bringing homemade signs expressing solidarity with Marcus. The outpouring of support fortified him, reminding him that the battle he faced within the precinct was part of a larger struggle for justice and accountability. Inside the precinct, however, tensions ran higher than ever. Radley and Reed grew more antagonistic, their defiance now directed openly at Marcus. They mocked him under their breath, made snide remarks about his policies, and spread rumors about the investigation being a witch hunt designed to scapegoat loyal officers. One afternoon, during a routine department meeting, Radley finally crossed the line. As Marcus discussed procedural changes aimed at reducing incidents of unnecessary force, Radley interrupted with an air of contempt. Chief Kane, with all due respect, it's hard to take these policies seriously. You keep talking about integrity and accountability, but most of us are just trying to do our jobs. Not all of us are here to play politics. The room fell silent, every pair of eyes flicking between Marcus and Radley. Marcus's face remained calm, but there was a controlled edge in his voice as he responded. Officer Radley, our job is to protect and serve this community with respect. If you're unwilling or unable to meet those standards, then maybe you need to question why you're here. Radley's jaw tightened, his face reddening as he sneered. Maybe it's you who should be questioning why you're here. Not everyone is impressed with the changes you're making. Marcus didn't flinch, his voice calm but firm. My job is to lead this department with integrity, officer. If that makes some people uncomfortable, so be it. This isn't a popularity contest. It's about doing what's right. Radley scowled but fell silent, realizing he had pushed Marcus as far as he could without risking immediate disciplinary action. But the confrontation had sent a clear message to the department. Marcus was willing to stand his ground, regardless of the resistance he faced. Meanwhile, Captain Price, sensing the tide turning against him, made one last attempt to undermine Marcus's authority. He began circulating a petition among officers, framing it as a vote of no confidence in Marcus's leadership. Under the guise of protecting officer morale, Price claimed that the petition was necessary to prevent further division within the ranks. Price's petition created a ripple of uncertainty, with some officers feeling torn between their loyalty to Marcus and the influence Price had cultivated over the years. However, many officers who had witnessed Marcus's dedication to the community chose to remain silent, refusing to sign the petition. They had come to respect Marcus's integrity, and even if they didn't agree with every policy, they knew he was working toward a greater good. Harris, upon hearing about the petition, approached Marcus privately. Chief, I want you to know that most of us see through this. We're not backing Price's scheme. Marcus nodded, his expression serious but grateful. Thank you, Harris. I know this isn't easy, but we're going to see this through. I won't let them take away the progress we've made. Despite Price's efforts, the petition ultimately failed to gain traction. Marcus's leadership and the support he had cultivated among both his officers and the community proved stronger than Price's attempt to divide them. Price, humiliated and increasingly isolated, was forced to abandon his scheme. After weeks of interviews, document reviews, and witness statements, the commissioner's investigation concluded. The findings were clear. Officers Radley and Reed had repeatedly engaged in misconduct, including evidence tampering, harassment, and multiple breaches of protocol. Their actions were deemed a violation of the department's ethical standards, warranting immediate disciplinary action. Captain Price, though not directly implicated in the tampering, was cited for failing to address and report the misconduct of his subordinates, making him complicit in fostering a culture of negligence and insubordination. The commissioner's report recommended that disciplinary measures be taken, including possible suspension and reassignment. Marcus gathered the department for an official announcement, his voice steady as he addressed his team. After a thorough investigation, it has been determined that certain officers engaged in conduct that violated our department's values and our commitment to this community. Effective immediately, Officers Radley and Reed are suspended without pay pending further review, and Captain Price will be reassigned. The room was silent, a mixture of shock and relief visible on the faces of those present. Some officers, those who had quietly supported Radley and Reed, exchanged nervous glances, while others looked relieved, as though a heavy burden had finally been lifted from their shoulders. Marcus continued, his tone unwavering. I know this hasn't been easy, but this department is here to serve with integrity, and that means holding ourselves accountable. We're moving forward, and I expect each of you to join me in making this precinct a place that honors the community's trust. As the officers dispersed, Marcus felt the weight of months of struggle finally beginning to lift. The investigation had validated his efforts, and though he knew the road ahead would still be challenging, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. Later that evening, as the precinct began to quiet down, Harris found Marcus in his office, a look of quiet satisfaction on his face. Chief, I just wanted to say thank you. I know you put yourself on the line for this, and it means a lot." Marcus looked up, his expression softening. "Thank you, Harris. I couldn't have done this alone. You stood by me when things were at their toughest, and I won't forget that." Harris smiled, a sense of relief evident in his posture. "Feels like we're finally getting somewhere. Like we're building something real." Marcus nodded, feeling the truth of Harris's words. "We are, and we're going to keep building it one step at a time. I want every officer who wears this badge to feel proud of what it stands for." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their shared journey settling around them. For the first time in months, Marcus felt a genuine sense of peace, knowing that the department was finally beginning to reflect the values he had set out to uphold. As Marcus prepared to leave for the night, he found one last note waiting for him, tucked beneath his office door. This time, the message was stark, almost desperate. "You may have won this round, but don't think this is over." Marcus held the note, his face impassive, and carefully folded it before placing it in his desk drawer. He knew that while the immediate threat of Radley and Reed had been addressed, there would always be those who resisted change. But he was undeterred. He had taken the first critical steps, and he would face whatever challenges lay ahead with the same resolve that had brought him this far. As he walked out into the cool night air, he felt a renewed determination. He wasn't just changing policies or addressing misconduct. He was building a legacy, one that would stand as a testament to the power of integrity, resilience, and the courage to do what was right, even in the face of relentless opposition. This was only the beginning, and Marcus was ready for whatever came next. 1 year had passed since the pivotal investigation that led to the suspensions of Radley and Reed, as well as Captain Price's reassignment. Under Marcus's guidance, the department had undergone a transformation, and the precinct felt markedly different. Officers walked with a renewed sense of purpose, and community interactions had shifted from tense and skeptical to warm and open. As Marcus entered the precinct that morning, he noticed a group of young recruits gathered by the entrance. These were new hires, officers who had been selected for their commitment to upholding the department's values, and they represented the beginning of a new era for the force. Officer Ben Harris, now a senior member and Marcus's trusted ally, approached him, nodding at the recruits. "Chief, looks like the fresh faces are ready for your welcome speech. They've heard a lot about you. Rumor has it you're a bit of a legend around here," Harris said with a grin. Marcus chuckled, shaking his head. "A legend, huh? I'm just a guy doing his job. But if that's what it takes to inspire them to do theirs with honor, then I'm glad." Harris's smile turned thoughtful. "You've done a lot more than that, Chief. The people here finally believe in what we stand for. That's no small feat." Gathering the recruits in the main briefing room, Marcus introduced himself, his voice calm but resonant. "Welcome to the department," he began. "You're joining a team that values integrity, professionalism, and respect above all else. Here, we don't just enforce the law. We earn the community's trust every day." He scanned the room, making eye contact with each recruit. "You'll be faced with challenges, moments that test your resolve. But remember that every decision you make impacts not only your career, but the lives of the people you serve. Carry your badge with pride, knowing that you're here to serve with honor." A sense of pride and hope filled the room as the recruits listened intently. Marcus could see in their faces the same sense of duty that had brought him into the field years ago. He felt a deep satisfaction knowing that the department was in good hands, with officers committed to upholding the legacy he had worked so hard to build. A few weeks later, the town council held a community event to honor Marcus's leadership and the positive changes within the department. The event was held at a local park, where residents gathered to celebrate and express their gratitude for the chief's work. Speakers from across the community shared stories of their renewed faith in law enforcement, recounting instances where officers had gone above and beyond to help those in need. Parents spoke of feeling safe, sending their children to school. Local business owners expressed relief at the restored sense of security. And even youth groups came forward, sharing how Marcus's mentorship programs had inspired them to see the police not as a distant authority, but as allies. At one point, a young girl approached the podium, nervously clutching a drawing she'd made of an officer in uniform. "Chief Kane," she said in a small but determined voice, "I drew this because you make me feel safe. Thank you for being my hero." The crowd erupted in applause, and Marcus felt his heart swell. He stepped forward, kneeling to meet the girl's gaze, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you. That means more to me than you know." After the event, Marcus had a chance to speak with the commissioner, who had observed the gathering with quiet pride. The commissioner shook Marcus's hand, his face thoughtful. "Chief Kane, you've done remarkable work here. It's rare to see a department transform this way, and I want you to know how much I respect the integrity you've brought to this role." Marcus nodded, humbled. "Thank you, Commissioner. I couldn't have done it without the support of the community and the officers who believed in the mission. They're the real heroes here." The Commissioner's gaze was steady. "Leadership like yours doesn't go unnoticed. When you're ready, we'd like you to consider taking on a larger role, helping other departments across the region implement similar reforms. The work you've done here could serve as a model." The offer took Marcus by surprise. He had been so focused on his department that he hadn't considered the possibility of extending his influence beyond it. But as he thought about the impact he could make, his resolve deepened. He realized that his mission to create a culture of integrity didn't have to end here. It could continue, reaching more communities in need of change. "I'd be honored," Marcus replied, a sense of purpose settling over him. "If I can help bring this kind of reform to other departments, then I'll do everything I can to make that happen." Later that evening, Marcus walked through the quiet streets of the town, reflecting on his journey. He thought back to the dark night on that frozen road, when he had been humiliated and tested, pushed to the brink of his patience and resolve. That experience had ignited something in him, a determination to change the very system that had failed so many before him. He thought of Radley, Reed, and Captain Price, of the obstacles they had thrown in his path, the resistance they had represented. But he also thought of Harris, the officers who had stood by him, and the community that had supported him every step of the way. As he looked around at the familiar streets, he felt a sense of peace. The department was no longer defined by secrecy or unchecked authority. It was a place of trust and accountability, a force for good in the lives of the people it served. Marcus Kane knew his journey was far from over. There were still communities in need of reform, still battles to be fought for justice and integrity. But he felt ready, knowing that he had made a lasting difference here, a legacy that would inspire others to continue his work. He walked into the future with a quiet, steady confidence, aware that he was part of something larger than himself. He had fought for justice, not just through policies or speeches, but through his actions, his resilience, and his unbreakable commitment to doing what was right. This was the legacy he would carry forward, a legacy of integrity, honor, and the courage to stand against the darkness, no matter how powerful. Thank you for joining Marcus's journey of courage, integrity, and change. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more tales of resilience and justice, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Hit the notification bell so you never miss a new story, and let us know in the comments what other stories of transformation and hope you'd love to hear. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for more inspiring stories.